Hello, happy Tuesday, probably morning, everybody. I'm going to keep the intro short. I just want to say the last video I put out, people were upset that I had an opinion on a player. So, guess what? I'm going to give you an opinion on 10 players. These are my top 10 dynasty quarterbacks. I'm going to do part two and do 11 through 20, probably Thursday. We'll see what happens, but I'm going to keep it short. I don't want to bore you by talking about why Mahomes is my quarterback one and all that other shit, but just giving you a nice little baseline, nice little outlet to see where I value players. So if you have questions in the comments as to trading players or other shit like that, you'll kind of know how to gauge the value there. But let's hit the intro and get to it. All right, quarterback one. There's not much to say here. I'm not going to go too in depth. I don't care that they only have like two real receivers on this team. Like outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey, what do they really have? They have like a 5'2" running back. They have Byron Pringle. They have the ghost of Sammy Watkins pass. They got Demarcus Robinson, who I don't even know if he's on the team anymore. It doesn't matter. Patrick Mahomes is one of the few quarterbacks in this top 10 that doesn't need to rely on rushing ability for him to be an elite quarterback. He still runs a little bit, but his arm is too good. That offense is too good for me to even give a fuck. So Patrick Mahomes, quarterback one, easy, locked and loaded. Once you get past him, this is where like a big tier starts. So I have a tier of about five. No, can't count. Four quarterbacks. You can rank them however you want. Really don't care. I have Josh Allen as my quarterback two because he brings the best of both worlds by having that arm talent and also being able to run the ball. He has rushed for at least 8 touchdowns each of his first 3 years in the league. Obviously, his first two, he wasn't that great at throwing the ball. Then they realized, hey, maybe we turn these big, fat, sloppy wide receivers into these 6 foot, 5'10, 5'9 short kings who can get open whenever they want, like Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, bring in Emmanuel Sanders, even a guy like John Brown. And guess what? That shit worked like it did for Cam Newton. Josh Allen last year looked absolutely incredible. I don't see his rushing going down anytime soon. Maybe they don't want him to get hurt, but the guy's a brick shit house. He's not going to get hurt running into cornerbacks and safeties. He'll get out of the way of linebackers or jump over him like Anthony Barr. So he is my quarterback too because I do think his arm talent is otherworldly while also bringing the ability to run on the ground. Quarterback three. This might be a little suspect because people somehow and for some reason hate him, but I got Lamar Jackson. Listen, you may argue he shouldn't even be on the list of quarterbacks. I'm going to argue that the guy won fucking MVP and he's been like a top 5 fantasy quarterback each of the past 2 years. I know this past year he definitely dipped down. He was quarterback one the year before, but anytime you can guarantee like 1,000 rushing yards, almost double digit rushing touchdowns, and then also being an efficient passer, sure, he's not the best pure quarterback in the NFL in real life, right? He's not going to make the best throws. He doesn't have the best arm talent, but they did a lot to help build this receiving core. They added a guy like Tyler Wallace, who I really like in the 4th round. They added Rashad Bateman in the first. They still have Mark Andrews. They brought in the aforementioned dead, but will never die, Sammy Watkins. They have Hollywood Brown. They have a pretty solid receiving core, and the running back core really hasn't had any type of upgrades. All they have now is Lamar Jackson, I guess, but J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I I would be surprised if they turn more pass heavy, like significantly, but I wouldn't be surprised if, a little bit of that rushing volume goes to the passing game just because the lack of depth in the running back room and the fact that they're in a very tough and competitive division. I know the Steelers defense and that whole team isn't the same as they used to be, at least to start off the year when they were like 11 and 0 and then getting thrashed by the Washington football team. But the Cleveland Browns are good. The Bengals aren't good, but they're up and coming. And in the playoffs, right, it's going to be tough to compete with guys like the Chiefs, even like, I don't know, the Chargers, not to be a homer, but like Buffalo. I'm just not sure that the game plan of just running the ball 40 times and not being able to rely on your quarterback making big time throws all the time is going to pay off in the long run. So I could see them definitely having him drop back a little bit more. And although for fantasy, it's not going to be as beneficial for him to throw more than he runs because running quarterbacks score a ton, I do think that it'll help his longevity. And I think he's going to be around for the long term, even though people want to say that he's not a good quarterback. Would a not good quarterback win MVP and then bring his team to the playoffs every single year, even as a rookie? I don't think so. Quarterback four for me, the guy who proved me wrong, and I'm not upset about it, Justin Herbert. To me, he's like Josh Allen, but a little less proven. I do think he can have the same upside and has potential to be the quarterback two in Dynasty after this year. But the one thing that separates them is their rushing upside. Josh Allen has proven he can run for 8, 9 touchdowns a year and also a couple handful of hundreds of yards. Whereas Justin Herbert has that ability. We know he's athletic, but he doesn't get his number called nearly enough. Maybe with a new coaching staff, that's going to change. I doubt it, though. I don't think that they want this guy to get hurt extending plays and running outside the pocket and shit like that. But he definitely has that upside. When it comes to arm talent, not to be a homer again, but I do think he is like top 3 or 4 arm talent in the NFL. We saw it last year. Their receiving core really hasn't had much of an upgrade. They have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams added fucking Josh Palmer, and a tight end with the last name Kitty. It's nothing special, but guess what? Wasn't anything special last year. He was throwing to bums like Tyron Johnson and Jalen Guyton, who have more interest in posting on Instagram than actually catching passes in the NFL. So I don't think that the lack of weapons or the lack of upgrading weapons going to this year is going to hurt him. Keenan Allen's going to be healthy. Austin Eckler's going to be healthy. I think the offensive line is going to be a big help getting Rashawn Slater, who's probably going to play on, I don't even know, left or the right side, a tackle position. We also got Bulaga. We got Corey Linsley. They really shored up the center position and their tackles. So I do think that's going to help him because the offensive line has been a fucking major issue in LA for a long ass time. I think that'll be shored up at least a little bit with a bunch of weapons that he already has some rapport with. So he is my quarterback 4. And then quarterback 5, the end of this tier, we have Kyler Murray. I feel like Kyler Murray should be getting the hate that Lamar Jackson is getting, but he isn't. Not to say that Kyler Murray is a bad quarterback. I'm not even going to talk about real life value because real life value doesn't really matter for fantasy football. Blake Bortles was like the quarterback one year. So for fantasy, the guy runs a lot. He can throw a lot. They got good weapons. They just added Rondell Moore. They have DeAndre Hopkins. They have no running backs that can actually run the ball, but they have running backs that can kind of catch the ball. Now DeAndre Hopkins says he want to restructure his contract for Julio Jones to come in there. They bring in old ass AJ Green. They have like the all pro team from like 2012 out there. I don't hate it. He is a quarterback who is going to run a shit ton. He's going to throw deep balls, and that's what you want in fantasy football. He has a coach that cannot win a game no matter who his quarterback is. If Joe Montana was playing in the NFL today and Cliff Kingsbury was his coach, they'd go like, 7-10 because of 17 games. Whatever the case may be, Cliff Kingsbury is an absolute, let me choose my words carefully. He's an absolute buffoon, but for fantasy, it doesn't matter. I know Kyler started off super hot and then tailed off towards the end of the year, but you got to remember he had, I'm not going to fact check it, but I think he had like a shoulder injury or some shit like that. And he really slowed down as the year went on, but he was still running the ball a ton. And a big reason why he fell off is those goal line carries. He was kind of vulturing from Kenyon Drake, went back to Kenyon Drake on those read options. I do think that this year, with a running back stable of fucking James Conner and Chase Edmonds, Kyler Murray is going to regain those opportunities. And I also think being in that division, sure, there's some pretty good defenses in San Francisco and in LA, but those are also going to be super competitive games playing against those teams as well as the Seattle Seahawks. So could be shootouts and divisional matchups. And Kyler Murray is just a guy who, even if he has a bad game in real life, he can salvage it with like 87 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. That's 6 plus 8.7. Quick math, that's 14.7 points. To turn that in, passing ball wise, that's like 3.5 passing touchdowns. I hope my math is correct. Obviously, you get yards when you throw for a touchdown, but you know what I mean. It's more valuable to run than it is to throw, and he does that in spades. And the next tier, it's 3 more players, 1 rookie, 2 vets. Trevor Lawrence is my quarterback 6. Now, that may seem a bit high. I may seem a bit high. I assure you, neither is the case. Maybe. But Trevor Lawrence looks to be this generational type of prospect. Listen, I'm not going to say he is. I also feel like Trevor Lawrence has just gotten a pass for being generational and nobody really like knocks his game because he's generational. Whatever the fuck that means. But he obviously had an incredible collegiate career. He goes number 1 overall to a team that has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to offensive weapons, and their defense is still hot garbage. They have wide receivers like DJ Chark. They have Laviska Shenault. They brought in a veteran like Marvin Jones. They bring in a young supposed receiver in Travis Etienne. They have James Robinson out of the backfield. They even got Tim Tebow running routes, or at least trying to. The only route I think he knows is the crossing route. But I digress. I do think that Trevor Lawrence is mobile enough to provide probably the same upside as like Joe Burrow before he got injured or Justin Herbert did last year, while also having arm talent in a division that really doesn't have that many good defenses. Houston doesn't even have a football team to put on the field. Tennessee, they like on paper seem like a good defense. They just aren't good. Indy is very good. I'll give Indy that credit. But they're also in a division with like 2 very competitive teams in Indy and in the Tennessee Titans. So they're going to have to throw. And obviously, like interdivisional games and when they're not playing in division, there's going to be other opponents. And I do think that Trevor Lawrence is going to be in a position to succeed for fantasy because the weapons that he has. He has deep threats like Chark and Marvin Jones. He has guys that can win after the catch in ETN and Laviska Shenault. I do think that his receiving core is one of the more underrated ones in the NFL. And if he lives up to the hype in any sort of way, I think quarterback 6 is a fair spot to put him. Even if he finishes as like quarterback 13 this year, even if he has a very similar year to Joe Burrow, I think that would be a success because the situation he's been put in behind a not so great offensive line supported by a not good defense, it might be a lot of garbage time, which could be good for fantasy. But if he has like a down year by finishing outside of quarterback 1, his hype and his age and the youth of the team built around him is going to help buoy his value as a top 10 at least quarterback. And I have him quarterback 6 just because I think it's a very safe place to value him at. Quarterback 7, I have Dak Prescott. You can argue, and I wouldn't argue against it, having Dak ahead of Trevor Lawrence, but you got to weigh your options. Would you rather have an unknown commodity in Trevor Lawrence, or would you rather have a guy who just snapped his leg in half like a hockey stick? Me personally, I'll take Trevor Lawrence. Dak Prescott, though, if he's fully healthy, 100% with that receiving core, you could argue him ahead of even like Justin Herbert as quarterback 4, maybe even ahead of Lamar Jackson as quarterback 3. He proved last year before getting injured that he can reel back and sling that thing. That offense was super high powered. We know he can run the ball. He's like a little bit lesser of a Josh Allen when it comes to rushing touchdowns. And there's really not much else to say. They're in a division that doesn't like playing football, let alone playing defense. And we saw that come to fruition in the beginning of last year. Even the years previous, when he wasn't like nearly as good throwing the ball, he was still like a top 6 quarterback. And I think he was like quarterback 11, but he's basically been a top 12 quarterback every year he's had the reins of the offense. I don't see that changing. He's still young, got a big deal in Jerry World. He's going to be a good quarterback for fantasy for many years to come. Quarterback 8 is the last one of this tier, and I kind of hate him being in this tier. It's Russell Wilson. Listen, Russell Wilson is the best quarterback in the NFL for about 8 to 9 weeks. We'll see what happens with the 17-week season this year. And then the rest of the year, it's just dog shit. It's not his fault, but it's dog shit. The team doesn't want to throw the ball. They start giving it to Chris Carson. They call up JD McKissick from like the fucking Washington football team to come over and tote the rock 7 times a game. It's just a mess. I do think that the lack of running backs this year, kind of like what I said with Kyler Murray, maybe the lack of running backs in Seattle this year will entice the team to do what they should always do and let Russell Wilson cook. But then again, it wouldn't surprise me if they call up Marshawn Lynch halfway through the year and they're like, hey, go beast mode. And then he runs like 17 times for 34 yards and a touchdown, and they think that's good. But Russell Wilson, it's hard to argue that he shouldn't be a top 10 quarterback just because even despite his age, he's the oldest one on this list so far by a long, wide margin. A long, wide margin. I don't know what the fuck that means. But in those weeks where he's hot, he is hot and he'll throw 40 touchdowns in like a 12-week span. And then the rest of the year, he'll do nothing. But with his weapons being fairly young, I know Tyler Lockett isn't young, but he's signed for a few more years. They have DK Metcalf, but he's just very consistently consistent when it comes to passing touchdowns, when it comes to rushing yards. I know it's not nearly as fruitful as it was when he was younger, but he can still give you the upside on the ground. And in those weeks when he's on and he's cooking, you can't bench him for anybody. In a super flex league, he's always starting for you. In a one quarterback league, there really isn't, other than like Patrick Mahomes, somebody I'd feel more comfortable starting over him when he's actually reeling back and throwing the ball 40 times a game. All we can hope for is that this is the year things change. We've been saying that for like 5 years now, and it never changes. But if this is the year, then Russell Wilson could easily finish top 5, top 3, or even quarterback 1 in fantasy football. And I think him being my quarterback 8 kind of builds in that upside while also building in a floor. And his floor is like the quarterback 12. So I think that's a safe place to put him. And then the final tier in my top 10, quarterback 9 and quarterback 10, 2 rookies, Trey Lance and Justin Fields. You can order them however you want. I would say pre-draft, I would have Fields then Lance. Post-draft, I have Lance then Fields. People are worried that Trey Lance isn't going to play year 1. I think even if he doesn't play the majority of the year, or if he sits like, I don't know, only 3 or 4 games, I think that's enough to know how good he'll be or like his upside going into the next year. Like Tua last year didn't play for a majority of the year. And I'm not so sure that if he sat the entire year, he wouldn't be a higher valued player than if he played this year. Like what we saw out of Tua was nothing impressive. However, if Tua sat the entire year and he was like a top 6 pick, so it's not like Jordan Love, who we didn't think was good going into it. But if Tua sat the entire year and then was projected to be the starter this year, I think he'd be valued higher than what actually came about, where he played a few games and he didn't look so good. So if Trey Lance sits the entire year, I don't think his value tanks that much. If he plays half the year and he's awesome, his value is obviously going to skyrocket. If he plays half the year and he's semi decent, we might see a little bit of a fall off like we saw with Tua Tagovailoa, but Tua is still regarded as like a top 15 dynasty quarterback. So the floor, in my opinion, isn't as low as you may think, despite him probably not playing the entire season. I personally think that he's going to play the entire season. We know Jimmy G isn't good. We know they want him out of town. And as somebody said, I forgot who it was, but Trey Lance already sat an entire year his last year in college. He played one game, which I'm not going to count. You really think that they drafted this guy number 3 overall for him to sit 2 years and then expect him to be still good at football after 2 years? Sure, he can play in the preseason or whatever, but I'm not going to bet on that happening. I think he's going to come out the gate swinging. He can run the ball with the best of them. And the fact that his weapons are all yak monsters means he doesn't have to unleash that cannon arm. Maybe he's not as accurate as we want him to be, and he struggles with the deep ball. Good. He has Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, George Kittle, and probably 15 other practice squad guys like Richie James who can catch 2 yard slants and take him for 80-yard house calls. So I like the weapons that he's surrounded by. I like his coaching staff. I like the team and the situation, and I like the talent. So he's my quarterback 9. And then quarterback 10 is Justin Fields. If Twitter never existed, then I think Justin Fields would have like a really good chance of having gone 101 in this year's draft. But because there was all these like fake reports about how he doesn't like football despite playing with broken ribs and beating the first overall pick in this year's draft, he slipped down the board all the way to the Chicago Bears who traded up to get him. Now, the Bears haven't been good at getting quarterbacks or scouting quarterbacks. They paid Nick Foles money. Nick Foles sucks. They traded up for Mitch Trubisky. We know the deal with him. They just signed Andy Dalton and called him quarterback 1. It's a mess. They're a mess. But Justin Fields is good. They have good weapons. They have Allen Robinson, who is franchise tagged. If Justin Fields shows out, would Allen Robinson go back to Chicago? Who knows? I feel like he has a vendetta against the city, but I don't think he would turn down playing with an elite young quarterback. He has guys like Darnell Mooney, who I don't think are like terrible. He has a good running game behind him with David Montgomery. He has Tariq Cohen out of the backfield. He has a young guy in Cole Kmet, and he has like the corpse of Anthony Miller. So it's not a great receiving core. He does have like a few really good weapons, but just like Trey Lance, I don't think it's going to be just his arm that he relies upon, especially for fantasy value. I could see him having the ceiling of like Dak Prescott 2.0, running a little bit more than Dak, probably even has better arm talent or arm talent upside than Dak Prescott. I'm not going to say he's better than him at this moment, but I could see him pushing for top 5 quarterback type of upside in fantasy football. And his floor, again, I think his rushing ability is going to keep his floor fairly high and not see him drop outside of the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks after year 1. Kind of like what I said with Tua, right? Tua fell down the board from being like a top 10 fantasy quarterback in Dynasty to like quarterback 15 or whatever, but he also doesn't have the rushing upside that Fields or Lance have. So I think that upside alone, along with their draft capital, is going to help them maintain value, even if they don't show out in year 1. But that's all I got for my top 10. I'll be releasing whenever this video comes out. Expect 2 days later. So if it's Tuesday, expect Thursday. If it's Wednesday, expect Friday. If this video never comes out, then I don't know what happened. But 2 days later, I will be posting my quarterback 11 through 20. And I think then the following week, I'll do the same for running backs, then wide receivers, and then tight ends. I'll talk about like 2 of them because they all fucking stink. But that's all I got for today. Leave a comment down below if you think anybody belongs in my top 10 that isn't there. Let me know if you think somebody's too high, too low, or whatever. Listen, shit's probably not going to change off a YouTube comment, but I'm always down to listen. So that's all I got for today. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Thumbs down if you didn't. Subscribe if you're new. And we'll catch you guys sometime soon. Peace.
Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoenaed for misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a zen. And I still shake a boat squat. Praying for my broke, got city on the come.